Hi, sixth grade readers. This is the second session of our reading unit, getting back into independent reading and building a vibrant reading life. Before you start, I think you might want to have something to write on. I just have some paper and a pen. I also have some Post-its nearby. You might want to have some of those things, or you also could just open Google Keep and you could make a new note and just title it Session 2 or Lesson 2. Maybe even write the date, and don't forget to tag me to it so you can show me after. So we've been thinking a lot about identity and reading and writing and everything we've been talking about lately in school. And we're going to continue to do that work now, growing a deeper understanding of who we are as readers, not just today, but who we were in the past and who we will become in the future. And so to do that, I'm going to share with you an excerpt from one of my favorite fiction books all time. And I bet you probably will be able to figure out what the book is after just a few sentences. So enjoy and maybe start thinking about what might have drawn me, your teacher, to this book. You know a bit about my identity at this point. I've talked to you a lot about it in other lessons. Maybe you have some predictions, some wonderings, some theories about why this book is important to me. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Call me Hagrid, he said. Everyone does. And like I told you, I'm keeper of keys at Hogwarts. You'll know all about Hogwarts, of course. No, said Harry. Hagrid looked shocked. Sorry, Harry said quickly. Sorry, barked Hagrid, turning to stare at the Dursleys, who shrank back into the shadows. It's them who should be sorry. I knew you weren't getting your letters, but I never thought you wouldn't even know about Hogwarts, for crying out loud. Did you never wonder where your parents learned it all? All what? Asked Harry. All what? Hagrid thundered. Now, wait just 1 second. He leapt to his feet. In his anger, he seemed to fill the whole hut. The Dursleys were cowering against the wall. Do you mean to tell me, he growled at the Dursleys, that this boy knows nothing about anything? Harry thought this was a bit far, going a bit too far. He had been to school after all, and his marks weren't bad. I know some things, he said. I can, do math and stuff. But Hagrid simply waved his wand and said, about our world. I mean, your world, my world, your parents' world. What world? Hagrid looked as if he was about to explode. Dursley! He boomed. Uncle Vernon, who had gone very pale, whispering something that sounded like... Hagrid stared wildly at Harry. But you must know about your mom and dad, he said. I mean, they're famous. You're famous. What? My mom and dad weren't famous, were they? You don't know? You don't know? Hagrid ran his fingers through his hair, fixing Harry with a bewildered stare. You don't know what you are? He said finally. Uncle Vernon suddenly found his voice. Stop, he commanded. Stop right there, sir. I forbid you to tell that boy anything. A braver man than Vernon Dursley would have quailed under the furious look Hagrid now gave him. When Hagrid spoke, his every syllable trembled with rage. You never told him? You never told him what was in the letter Dumbledore left for him? I was there. I saw Dumbledore leave it, Dursley, and you kept it from him all these years? Kept what from me? Said Harry eagerly. Stop, I forbid you, yelled Uncle Vernon in panic, and Aunt Petunia gave a gasp of horror. Go boil your heads, both of you, said Hagrid. Harry, you're a wizard. There was silence inside the hut. Only the sea and the whistling wind could be heard. I'm a what? Gasped Harry. A wizard, of course, said Hagrid, sitting back down on the sofa, which groaned and sank even lower. And a thumping good one, I'd say, once you've been trained a bit. With a mom and dad like yours, what else would you be? And I reckon it's about time you read your letter. Harry stretched out his hand at last to take this yellowish envelope, addressed in emerald green to Mr. H. Potter, the floor, hut on the rock, the sea. He pulled out the letter and read, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock, Supreme Magwump, International Confederation of Wizards. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1. We await your owl by no later than July 31. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. I love that excerpt. I love it so much. The magic, the tension, the family drama and dynamic, so weird. Also, it's just, I have the chills just talking about it, but it's the start of this amazing adventure for this character, this kid character. And he doesn't even know what he's in for, but we kind of know. He's in for the ride of a lifetime. And as readers, we go along with him for the whole thing. When I first read this as a kid, well, actually, this was read aloud to me first, and then it slowly became mine. I started reading this book with my dad. We started reading it together when I was in about second grade. He would read to me first, and then slowly I would start reading more and more to him. Then we would start reading chapters at a time. He'd read a chapter, and I read a chapter, until finally he said, I think you've got this. And I just kind of kept reading and eventually finished the entire series. This book meant the world to me, and I bet you have books that already do or maybe will also mean the world to you. This is my little Harry. I have him on my desk, of course, for inspiration. So today I'm going to teach you that readers develop personal reading identities based on the history of books and authors that have meant a lot to them. I just shared with you one that means so much to me, but I want to also walk you through some steps that I've taken to figure out really like what this is big picture and how I know that Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling have been a big part of my life as a reader, but I want to know like how they've affected my identity as a reader and how they might continue to affect it as I continue to grow, even as an adult. And as I take some of these steps, you might start to do the same thing as well with your own reading identity. So maybe take out a Post-it, pencil, paper, and just start thinking alongside me. So we might go back to our reading identity, right? Thinking about like who you are as people, and now just kind of filling in some of the gaps and thinking about us as a reader as well. One way that you could do this, and that I've kind of done as well, is to think about your textual lineage. This is like the history of your reading, the history of your life as a reader. Thinking about how it all started and how it's gone since and how it will continue to grow and go after this. And so you might start by making a timeline, like thinking about the first memory you have. You also might do things like just make a list of everything that's in your mind about reading that stands out to you that you feel like could be important. All the books, all the series, all the authors that you've loved over the years. You could also start thinking about like experiences with books as well. We've done a little bit of this work already with identity, all the identity work we've done in other classes and other sessions. But sometimes it's really important to remember the moments that meant a lot to you as readers. Maybe the experiences you had that were either really good or really bad. Moments that made you feel confident as a reader and moments that made you feel not so confident. Maybe books have done that to you. I've definitely had books that have pushed me to the limit. Maybe I tried reading a book that was just way above my reading level, or maybe I read a book that was way below, and those experiences have stuck with me in not so great ways. Maybe you've had something like that too. You also maybe just want to make another identity web, but this time to start to make it with reading in mind, specifically reading in your reading life. So I'm going to do this again and thinking about all my favorites. I'm going to just think deeply. My favorite books, series, authors, and moments, and how over time all those things have either evolved or changed, and how I've evolved and changed in the process as well. So I decided at first, well, I kind of started making a timeline, and I got kind of like overwhelmed because I remembered so many books. So then I tried to go back again to the beginning of the timeline and say, okay, what's the first book that meant like that really just like was a huge deal? The first book I read that was a huge deal, and that's where I came across, or that's not came across. So that's where I realized that was Harry Potter. That was like the first series I was like absolutely addicted to. It was like the first series that I would just spend the entire, like as soon as I got the book, I would go home and just spend the entire day reading. Literally, I wouldn't talk to anyone until I was done. It was insane. I had to know exactly what happened and would read for like 2 days straight. And as you probably have seen, the books get bigger and bigger. So as they got bigger and bigger, I was reading more and more. It's kind of cool because I grew up with the series. It came out when I was a kid. And so like as the books got harder, I grew with them too. So it just was so big. So I just want to start by thinking maybe, okay, Harry Potter was a big thing. And that was my first major series obsession. But what did that lead to? Like what else came from that? Let me just think. I remember afterwards, or like around the time I was reading it, maybe even in between books, I have teachers recommend things to me. I think one of the first things that was recommended to me was probably Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia. So that's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And my dad loved that book, so we wanted to read another one together. And I think that maybe we did something similar. He read some, I read some, but I remember going on and reading basically the rest of the series and just loving it. I loved it so much. And it was another thing that I got like really obsessed with and really just kind of stuck with. And eventually that I remember led me to other series that were kind of similar. I think when I got like maybe 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I started to read a series called His Dark Materials. Oh my gosh, it's so good. It's also a TV show. I mean, all of these are TV shows or movies. His Dark Materials. I remember starting to get into that one, maybe like towards the end of elementary, maybe 6th grade. And that also like led me to other things too. I think I remember maybe around the time, like in between Harry Potter books and around the time I was reading His Dark Materials, I think Series of Unfortunate Events was recommended to me as well. And that I just cruised through. In fact, I remember specifically in middle school, I had insomnia, meaning I had a hard time falling asleep. So I'd go into my closet at night and I would just read an entire book a night. This series specifically, I would just like read it. I spent so much time doing that. And that led me to other things too. Like I got more advanced when I was in middle school and I started to read things like Lord of the Rings. And then I started to read, I also remember like around this time too, like I really liked all the Roald Dahl books and I still love them. I think I would read them like in between and I read some of them in middle school as well. I also remember reading books like kind of like what His Dark Materials reminds me of. Like I read Aragon, I read Artemis Fowl. Oh, these were just such fun. I would just like eat them up. And then as I got older, I kind of started to change a bit. I remember like a big thing for me when I got like, a little bit older, I was really into fantasy. I would kind of just find any fantasy series I could get my hands on and just kind of devour it. I remember maybe like in 8th grade, I read Romeo and Juliet. And it was the first time I just really became obsessed with something that was a love story. And I was like, what is happening to me? I'm changing. I don't just want to hear about kids like doing really, really cool stuff and like saving the world. I want to hear about love. But there was something also kind of familiar about Romeo and Juliet because it's like this story that's like forbidden and also really dark and kind of magical. There's like references to fairies, even if there aren't fairies. And as you can probably tell, I'm a huge fantasy nerd. So that was a big turning point for me. And that led me to other books. Like I read Pride and Prejudice, I think like towards the end of middle school, maybe in high school, which is a book super famous by Jane Austen. And that led me to books also kind of similar like Jane Eyre, all the Janes. I just was like really into these books now, getting a little bit older, about like strong female characters, and female characters that were shaking things up and changing things. Female characters that were strong and did what they wanted. I love that stuff. And then I had moments in high school, I think, where I kind of like was really missing this stuff, like this fantasy, this like really cool adventure world. So when a teacher recommended to me, which wasn't so fantasy at all, actually, recommended Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. And I was like, I started reading it and I was like, this isn't fantasy. What is this? But then I kept going with it. And I realized that I was also obsessed. It was a dystopian novel. So maybe it wasn't a fantastical world. It was like a dark, gloomy, scary world. And everything was like totally insane and wild. That led me to other books like 1984. Oh, and also I read The Hunger Games when I was a teenager. But I read The Hunger Games, even though it was kind of below my reading level. I was like, that came out, it was dystopian and fantasy, my new loves, and there was a love story in it. I was like obsessed. So, okay, let's just take a look at this for a second. I went kind of like through time, right? I started with like the things that really stuck out. I could have listened for you all of the books I read. But I just like tried to stick with like big stuff, big authors' names, big series that really stuck out to me. And now I'm looking at this, I'm gonna think like, what pattern emerges? What am I realizing about myself as a reader? Like, what are the books that I've always loved to read? And how have I maybe evolved? I mean, I think you can tell, like, I really like to read about kids. And not just any kids, like kids who face trouble. I like to watch kids who face trouble just like really shake stuff up, be heroes. I loved hero stories. All of these characters are heroes, but they also are all about characters who have trouble. And a lot of them obviously have magic, fantasy, right? And eventually I started to kind of fall in love with love stories, but not ordinary love stories, like complicated love stories that had really strong female characters. And I still love those. I'm thinking about things I'm reading now, and recently I just read I read a book called Normal People. And it kind of like is a lot of these things, like little pieces of it I can kind of see and hear in that book too. Even though it's like a realistic fiction book, there's strong female character. The characters are kind of intense and strange and complicated. Anyway, you're probably having some ideas about what you could be doing right now. So I want you to try it. Maybe you do something like me. You just really sketch it out and you have fun with it. Then you think about patterns or things you're noticing about yourself that you might not have before. Maybe you do a timeline because you want to keep it organized that way. Maybe you're on Google Keep already. Whatever it is, give yourself some time right now to do it. Spend a couple minutes to make this, to look back at it and to decide and say, wow, as a reader, I really like this stuff. Or this book, this series, this author, this character. This is really a huge part of my reading lineage. Give yourself some time to do that. So now that you have, hopefully you've given yourself a couple minutes to write this down, think it out. I want you to get ready to read today. And when you read, you're going to be reading inside the Padlet that I have made for you and shared with you. When you read, I want you to keep this stuff in mind. And just like how the first time we read the Padlet, we were checking our identity webs. This time you're going to be reading the Padlet, checking your reading or textual lineage. You're going to be coming back to whatever you made and thinking about how the books that you're reading, or the text you're reading now on our Padlet, are shaped by, at all, by the books that you are bringing with you into every experience you have. Like, I carry this stuff around, right? In my heart, in my mind, in my reading lineage. So as you read books today on the Padlet and you consider books to stick with or stories to stick with, how is your lineage playing a role? You might really just kind of zoom in and think deeply about these questions. And I will also zoom in on this for you and stop our lesson here. So you have some time to really consider this big stuff. So as you read today, I want you to first stop and notice, take some time to stop and notice, how are you reacting to the books? Do you like them, dislike them? Are the books making you laugh or cry of sadness, or remember something, or have a connection to something? And then once you pick up a couple stories that you feel like you can really focus on, Ask yourself these questions. How do the texts that I've chosen on this Padlet fit with or don't fit with my identity? What am I noticing about myself as a reader? Those are the two questions that I asked myself after I made this crazy chart. And I want you to try to do the exact same thing. So you can get started on reading. You can look back to these charts that are already there, will be posted in the Padlet as well, and enjoy. Have fun, and remember, so much of who you are, it comes into everything you do as a reader. And all right, friends, I'll see you soon.